On a frigid morning in early March 1944, a young American bombardier named Carl Norden Jr. operated a precision instrument high above Berlin. His B-17 Flying Fortress cruised at 23,000 feet, through temperatures hovering around -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice formed on every metal surface inside the aircraft as he gazed through the optical viewfinder of the Mark 15 Norden Bombsight, an instrument that carried his father's name and represented, over 2 decades of intensive engineering development. The Bombsight weighed approximately 50 pounds and contained an intricate assembly of gears, gyroscopes, and optical elements. Its creator, Carl Norden Sr., had emigrated from the Netherlands to America and made an extraordinary promise to military leaders. His device could place a bomb inside a pickle barrel from 4 miles up. German intelligence officers who intercepted American communications and read, translated newspaper articles dismissed this assertion as obvious propaganda. Their own bombing strategies relied on attacking from medium altitudes between 8 and 12,000 feet, where pilots could actually see their targets clearly and achieve accuracy through crew experience and favorable weather. German forces had already examined captured Norden bomb sites. When a B-17 went down in Tunisia in early 1943 with its bomb site undamaged, German technicians transported the device to their Air Force testing center at Rechlin. Engineers and intelligence specialists spent weeks taking it apart, analyzing every component, and evaluating the American philosophy of precision bombing. Their written assessments acknowledged the sophisticated gyroscopic stabilization and ingenious mechanical computing abilities. However, they concluded that the fundamental concept of accurately hitting specific industrial facilities from altitudes above 20,000 feet during actual combat was essentially impractical. This skepticism arose from substantial operational experience. The Luftwaffe had conducted strategic bombing raids against British targets during 1940 and 1941. German aircrews quickly discovered that precision bombing proved extremely difficult, even at moderate altitudes under real combat circumstances. Weather obscured targets. Smoke from earlier bomb impacts created visual barriers. Anti-aircraft fire forced evasive actions that disrupted careful approach procedures. Enemy fighters attacked during bombing runs, creating chaos and forcing crews to prioritize survival over precise aiming. The psychological stress of combat degraded crew performance in ways that peacetime testing never revealed. German intelligence concluded that American claims represented psychological warfare rather than operational truth. The device might work adequately under perfect testing conditions at American proving grounds, where crews faced no resistance, weather remained clear, and targets were plainly visible. But genuine combat over heavily defended German industrial centers would expose the fundamental limitations of any mechanical bombing device, regardless of its sophistication. German analysts reasoned that Americans would eventually recognize these practical constraints and adopt area bombing methods similar to British Bomber Command, which had abandoned precision bombing after suffering catastrophic losses during daylight operations in 1941. This assessment would prove partially accurate in unexpected ways while simultaneously underestimating American dedication to precision bombing, philosophy, and the genuine technological achievement the Norden bombsight represented despite its eventual operational shortcomings. The doctrine of precision. Daylight bombing emerged from American strategic thinking during the interwar years. Officers at the Air Corps Tactical School at Maxwell Field, Alabama, developed these theories, influenced by Italian air power theorist Giulio Douhet, but adapting his concepts to American strategic circumstances. They argued that modern industrial economies contained specific vulnerable points. Destroy the ball-bearing factories, the theory proposed, and tank production stops. Eliminate synthetic oil refineries, and the Luftwaffe stays grounded. Precision strikes against carefully selected targets would prove more efficient than indiscriminate area bombing that destroyed worker housing and civilian morale but left industrial capacity largely untouched. This doctrine required 2 essential technological elements. First, bomber aircraft capable of defending themselves against fighter attacks through heavy defensive armament, enabling daylight operations where visual bombing remained feasible. The B-17 Flying Fortress, with its multiple gun positions and robust construction, emerged as the platform designed to meet this requirement. Second, a bomb site accurate enough to hit specific buildings from altitudes high enough to complicate anti-aircraft fire while providing some protection from fighter interception. Carl Norden Sr. began developing his bomb site during the 1920s. initially working for the Navy before Army Air Corps interests secured additional funding. The device used a stabilized optical system connected to an analog computer that continuously calculated the complex ballistics problem of dropping bombs from a moving aircraft at altitude. The Bombardier entered airspeed, altitude, and wind conditions. The bombsight's mechanical computer processed these variables, accounting for the bomb's trajectory as it fell through progressively denser air, while the aircraft continued forward. At the correct release point, the bombsight either automatically released the bombs or provided the Bombardier with visual indicators for manual release. Military services classified the Norden bombsight at the highest secrecy levels. Bombardiers took formal oaths never to discuss the device's technical details. Guards watched over bombsights during training flights. After each mission, crews removed the bombsights from aircraft and stored them in secure vaults. In the event of aircraft loss, bombardiers carried specific orders to destroy the bombsight before abandoning the aircraft. This security theatre served multiple purposes, protecting genuine technological advantages certainly, but also creating psychological mystique around American bombing capabilities that might influence enemy assessments and planning. American training programs for bombardiers emphasized the Norden's capabilities extensively. Instructors at bombardier schools across the United States taught the mechanical operation of the device through countless practice sessions. Trainees spent hours in link bombing trainers, early simulators that allowed practice without expensive flight time. The training curriculum stressed precision, discipline, and the bombardier's critical responsibility for mission success. Each man learned that he carried an instrument representing millions of dollars in development investment and years of engineering refinement. The doctrine and technology reflected distinctively American approaches to warfare. Precision bombing emphasized efficiency and specific military objectives over broader destruction. The sophisticated mechanical computer represented American engineering capabilities and manufacturing precision. The entire system assumed that technology properly applied with trained personnel could achieve results that traditional methods could not match. These assumptions would face severe testing over the skies of occupied Europe, where German defenses and European weather conditions created operational environments far removed from the clear skies and undefended ranges of training bases in Texas and New Mexico. Oberst Josef Kamhuber, responsible for analyzing Allied bombing capabilities during 1943, studied the available intelligence on American bombing doctrine with professional thoroughness. The evidence suggested that American air planners had committed themselves to a fundamentally flawed strategic concept that German air defenses could exploit. Systematically, German intelligence had accumulated substantial information about American bombing equipment and training through multiple sources. Luftwaffe intelligence officers interrogated captured American aircrews extensively, pressing for details about bombing procedures, equipment capabilities, and training emphasis. These interrogations occurred at WWII Luft, the Luftwaffe's central interrogation facility, located near Frankfurt, where experienced intelligence officers employed psychological techniques refined over years of questioning captured Allied personnel. The Americans, despite training to resist interrogation, often revealed useful information through casual conversation or responses to seemingly innocent questions. Captured technical manuals provided additional insights. When B-17s crashed on German-controlled territory, salvage teams recovered not only aircraft components, but also documentation that crews had failed to destroy completely. These papers, though often fragmentary or damaged, revealed American procedures, performance specifications, and operational expectations. German translators worked systematically through captured materials, extracting every useful detail. The examination of the captured Norden bombsight at Rechlin during 1943 provided the most detailed technical intelligence. German optical specialists appreciated the quality of the bombsight's lenses and prisms. Mechanical engineers studied the gyroscopic stabilization system with professional interest. The analog computing mechanism demonstrated clever design that solved complex ballistics calculations through mechanical means. However, the fundamental assessment remained skeptical about operational effectiveness under combat conditions. Typically lasting several minutes while the device calculated the release point. This stability requirement meant bombers could not execute evasive maneuvers during the critical final approach, creating a predictable target for anti-aircraft gunners. Weather conditions significantly affected performance. Cloud cover prevented visual bombing entirely, High winds at altitude introduced variables that could only be estimated rather than measured precisely. The device assumed certain atmospheric conditions that might not match actual weather over the target. The psychological dimension concerned German analysts as much as technical factors. Combat created stress that degraded human performance in documented ways. Bombardiers operating under fire, watching fellow aircraft explode around them, tracking attacking fighters while attempting to maintain concentration on bombing procedures, faced conditions bearing no resemblance to peacetime training environments. The Americans had invested enormous resources in a bombing system that assumed crews could maintain precision, performance under circumstances that made such precision extraordinarily difficult. Kamhuber's assessments circulated to Luftwaffe commanders and anti-aircraft artillery units, emphasizing that German defenses should force American bombers either to bomb from higher altitudes where accuracy would suffer dramatically, or to accept unsustainable losses if they attempted to maintain medium-altitude attacks. The Norden bombsight, regardless of its technical sophistication, could not overcome the fundamental reality that precision bombing under heavy defensive fire required conditions that defending forces could systematically deny. This confidence in defensive capabilities rested on German operational experience and a reasonable assessment of practical limitations that any bombing system faced. What German intelligence failed to anticipate was American willingness to accept substantial losses while refining tactics and the eventual development of long-range escort fighters that would transform the strategic bombing campaign in ways that rendered many German defensive assumptions obsolete. The bombsight itself would prove both more capable and more limited than either side initially believed. Second Lieutenant Robert Morgan arrived at Midland Army Airfield in Texas during July 1942 to begin bombardier training. The facility, one of several specialized bombardier schools established across the American Southwest, had been constructed specifically to produce the precision bombing specialists that daylight bombing doctrine required. The training program lasted 18 weeks and combined classroom instruction with practical flying experience that emphasized the Norden bombsight's operation under progressively challenging conditions. The curriculum began with basic principles. Instructors explained ballistics, trajectory calculations, and the variables affecting bomb flight. Trainees learned about terminal velocity, how bombs accelerated through thinner air at altitude before reaching maximum speed in denser air at lower altitudes. They studied wind drift, the horizontal displacement caused by prevailing winds at various altitudes. They learned about trail angle, the point behind the aircraft where bombs would impact based on forward velocity and altitude. These concepts, expressed through mathematical formulas and practical demonstrations, formed the theoretical foundation that the Norden bombsight automated through mechanical computation. The bombsight itself received reverential treatment during instruction. Guards escorted the devices from secure storage to training aircraft. Bombardiers signed for each bombsight personally, accepting responsibility for its security. Instructors emphasized repeatedly that this instrument represented America's most closely guarded bombing secret, a technological advantage that enemy forces desperately sought to obtain and understand. This security emphasis created psychological investment in the device's capabilities while reinforcing the bombardier's critical role in mission success. Physical operation required considerable practice before bombardiers achieved proficiency. The sight picture through the eyepiece showed a complex arrangement of crosshairs, reference marks, and the target area visible far below. The bombardier manipulated control knobs to input airspeed, altitude, and wind estimates, while keeping the crosshairs aligned with the target during the entire bombing run. The device's gyroscopes maintained stability despite aircraft movements. The mechanical computer continuously recalculated the release point as conditions changed. At the proper moment, the bombsight either triggered automatic release or illuminated an indicator showing the bombardier when to press the manual release button. Training flights from Midland occurred under nearly ideal conditions. Texas weather provided clear skies most days. Training ranges featured clearly marked targets with distinctive visual references. No enemy fighters attacked during practice runs. No anti-aircraft fire forced evasive maneuvers or created psychological pressure. Instructors emphasized precision, tracking each trainee's bombing accuracy through hundreds of practice drops. The goal of circular error probable within several hundred feet from 20,000 feet seemed achievable under these controlled circumstances. Morgan, qualified as a bombardier in November 1942, with scores demonstrating acceptable accuracy under training conditions. Like thousands of other young bombardiers completing training at facilities across America, he had internalized the doctrine of precision bombing and confidence in the Norden bombsight's capabilities. The device worked as advertised during training. Careful adherence to procedures produced accurate results. The distinction between training conditions and combat operations over heavily defended German industrial targets remained theoretical, something discussed in classrooms, but not yet experienced personally. The contrast between American and German bombardier training reflected broader differences in strategic doctrine and resources. German bomber crews, trained primarily for tactical support of ground operations rather than strategic bombing, received less specialized training in precision bombing techniques. The Luftwaffe had developed competent bombsights, including the Lotfe series that equipped German bombers, but German doctrine emphasized medium-altitude attacks against tactical targets, rather than high-altitude precision strikes against specific industrial facilities. German bombardiers typically trained for shorter periods, with less emphasis on the kind of precision attacks that American doctrine prioritized. By early 1943, when the 8th Air Force began sustained operations against German targets from bases in England, the American bomber force consisted largely of crews trained under conditions radically different from combat reality. They had learned procedures and developed confidence in equipment under circumstances that bore limited resemblance to operations over defended territory. Weather in England differed dramatically from Texas or New Mexico. European weather patterns brought frequent cloud cover, limiting visual bombing opportunities. German defences had been refined through years of combat experience against British night bombing. The collision between American training assumptions and European operational reality would occur gradually through accumulated missions that systematically revealed the gap between doctrinal expectations and practical results. August 17, 1943, marked the 8th Air Force's first deep penetration raid against Schweinfurt, a medium-sized Bavarian city whose importance far exceeded its size. Schweinfurt contained factories producing approximately half of Germany's ball-bearing output, making it a theoretically ideal target for precision bombing doctrine. Destroy these specific facilities, American planners reasoned, and German tank, aircraft, and vehicle production would suffer catastrophic disruption from bearing shortages. The mission profile reflected precision bombing theory translated into operational orders. 315 B-17s would strike 2 target complexes, the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt and aircraft manufacturing facilities at Regensburg. The Regensburg force would continue south to bases in North Africa after bombing, avoiding the return flight over defended territory. The Schweinfurt force would return to England after the attack. Fighter escorts would accompany the bombers to the limit of their range, approximately the German border, then return to base. The bombers would proceed unescorted to the targets, execute precision attacks using Norden bombsights, then fight their way back to the escort rendezvous point. The planning assumed that tight defensive formations and concentrated firepower from dozens of heavy machine guns per bomber would provide adequate protection during the unescorted portion. German fighters facing this defensive fire would break off attacks before inflicting unsustainable losses. The bombardiers would maintain stable bombing runs, despite enemy action, using their Norden bombsights to place bombs precisely on the factory buildings, visible from 24,000 feet. The mission would demonstrate that daylight precision bombing could work against heavily defended targets, despite the absence of escort fighters during critical mission phases. Reality diverged from planning immediately. Weather delayed takeoff, destroying the careful timing that should have overwhelmed German defenses through simultaneous attacks from multiple directions. German radar detected the formations while they were still over the English Channel, providing ample warning time for fighter units across Germany to prepare interception. When escort fighters reached their fuel limits and turned back near the German border, Luftwaffe fighters swarmed the bomber formations in coordinated attacks that demonstrated tactical sophistication developed through years of combat experience. German fighter pilots had learned that B-17s, despite their heavy defensive armament, possessed vulnerable approach angles, and that sustained attacks would eventually overwhelm defensive fire through sheer persistence. They attacked head-on, closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour, firing cannons and machine guns during brief firing opportunities before breaking away beneath the bomber formations. They coordinated attacks from multiple directions simultaneously, forcing gunners to divide attention and creating gaps in defensive coverage. They focused particular attention on bombers that showed damage or fell out of formation, finishing off crippled aircraft before they could return safely to England. Inside the bombers, the experience bore no resemblance to training flights over Texas ranges. Aircraft shuddered from cannon strikes, flak bursts, created black smoke clouds that formations had to fly through, steel fragments tearing through aluminum skin and finding hydraulic lines, control cables, and human bodies. Oxygen systems failed in damaged aircraft, forcing crews to choose between slow suffocation at altitude or descending to levels where German fighters could attack more easily. Wounded crew members needed immediate medical attention that proved impossible to provide adequately under combat conditions. Dead crew members remained at their positions because combat circumstances prevented moving bodies. The bombardiers, trained to maintain focus during extended bombing runs, confronted conditions that made precision bombing extraordinarily difficult. Evasive maneuvers to avoid flak bursts disrupted the stable flight that Norden bombsights required. Smoke from earlier bomb hits obscured target details. Attacking fighters forced bombardiers to abandon bombsights temporarily, watching for threats rather than maintaining concentration on bombing procedures. The psychological pressure of watching dozens of aircraft explode around them, parachutes appearing as crews abandoned burning bombers, created stress levels that training had never approximated. Despite these conditions, many bombardiers maintained discipline and executed bombing runs with professional competence. The Norden bombsights functioned mechanically as designed when crews could provide the stable platform and careful input the devices required, but accuracy suffered dramatically compared to training results. Bombs that should have struck specific factory buildings instead fell across residential areas, railroad yards, and open fields. Some bomb loads missed Schweinfurt entirely, impacting farms and villages miles from the intended target. The gap between doctrinal expectations and combat results became immediately, undeniably apparent. Of the 315 bombers dispatched, 60 failed to return to England. 600 men were killed, wounded, or captured during a single mission. The losses exceeded 14%, a rate that would exhaust the entire bomber force within weeks if sustained. The ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt sustained damage, but continued operating after repairs. German industry, having already begun dispersing bearing production to alternate facilities that intelligence had not identified. The mission demonstrated that precision bombing against heavily defended targets without adequate fighter escort resulted in unsustainable losses regardless of bombsight sophistication. Major Heinz Knoke, a Luftwaffe fighter pilot who participated in interceptions against American bomber formations during 1943, recorded his observations in a diary that survived the war. His entries following attacks against American bombers reflected professional assessment of enemy capabilities mixed with satisfaction that German defensive tactics proved effective against American bombing doctrine. Knoke noted that American bombardiers demonstrated discipline during attacks despite heavy fighter opposition. The formations maintained cohesion through coordinated defensive fire, and bombers continued toward targets even when sustaining losses that should have prompted tactical retreat. This determination impressed German pilots even while confirming that American forces would accept substantial losses rather than abandoning mission objectives. The precision bombing doctrine clearly represented genuine strategic commitment rather than experimental theory that would be abandoned after initial setbacks. However, Knoke and other Luftwaffe pilots observed that bombing accuracy deteriorated significantly under combat pressure. When formations executed evasive maneuvers to avoid concentrated flak, bomb patterns scattered widely. When attacking fighters forced bombardiers to divide attention between bombing procedures and defensive awareness, bombing precision suffered measurably. The theoretical advantages of sophisticated bombsights meant little when combat conditions prevented their optimal employment. German intelligence assessments following the Schweinfurt raid concluded that previous analyses had proven essentially correct. The Norden bombsight represented genuine technological sophistication and could produce impressive accuracy under favorable conditions. But combat over heavily defended German territory created circumstances that systematically degraded bombing accuracy regardless of equipment capabilities. American willingness to accept severe losses demonstrated strategic determination, but also suggested that American planners had not yet recognized the fundamental impracticality of unescorted daylight precision bombing. This assessment proved partially accurate while missing critical developments that would transform the strategic bombing campaign. American losses during summer and autumn 1943 indeed forced temporary suspension of deep penetration raids while commanders reassessed tactics. But American industrial capacity and determination to continue daylight operations remained underestimated by German intelligence. More significantly, development of long-range escort fighters capable of accompanying bombers throughout entire missions, particularly the P-51 Mustang, with its exceptional range and performance, would fundamentally alter the strategic equation in ways that German defensive planning had not anticipated. The Schweinfurt raid represented the climax of one phase of the strategic bombing campaign, the moment when precision bombing doctrine collided with combat reality and revealed fundamental vulnerabilities in American planning. But this moment of German defensive success also represented the high point of Luftwaffe effectiveness against American daylight operations. Within months, escort fighters would arrive in sufficient numbers to fundamentally change the tactical situation. By spring 1944, American bombers would return to targets across Germany with continuous fighter escort, forcing German fighters to engage through screens of superior Allied fighters before reaching bomber formations. The losses sustained during deep penetration, raids throughout summer and autumn 1943 forced American bomber commanders to confront uncomfortable realities about precision bombing doctrine. General Ira Eaker, commanding the 8th Air Force from headquarters in England, faced mounting pressure from both subordinate commanders witnessing crew losses firsthand and superior officers in Washington demanding results that justified the enormous resource investment in strategic bombing. The statistics told a sobering story. Between August and October 1943, the 8th Air Force lost more than 176 heavy bombers during missions against German targets, representing nearly 2,000 trained crew members killed, wounded, or captured. Replacement crews arrived from training facilities in America, but the experienced cadre that had developed tactical expertise through survival was being systematically destroyed faster than institutional knowledge could be transferred to newcomers. Bombardier training programs in America continued producing graduates confident in Norden, bombsight capabilities and precision bombing doctrine. These young officers arrived in England expecting to employ techniques learned during training under Texas skies. Veteran bombardiers who survived multiple combat missions understood the vast gulf between training conditions and combat reality, but struggled to articulate lessons that contradicted official doctrine. How could they explain that the sophisticated bombsight often proved less important than crew discipline, formation integrity, and sheer luck in determining mission outcomes? The psychological impact on bomber crews manifested in documented ways. Flight surgeons noted increasing stress symptoms among personnel completing multiple missions. The required 25-mission tour for rotation back to America seemed increasingly unattainable as loss rates climbed. Crews watched new arrivals complete 1 or 2 missions before disappearing. Their aircraft lost over Germany, with parachutes visible if they were fortunate, simply vanishing if they were not. The cumulative effect eroded the confidence that training had instilled. Mission planning adapted gradually to operational realities that doctrine had not anticipated. Target selection shifted toward objectives that justified losses even when bombing accuracy proved less than ideal. Planners scheduled missions based partly on weather forecasts, seeking conditions that might permit visual bombing while recognizing that European weather rarely provided the clear skies training had assumed. Formation tactics evolved through painful trial and error, crews discovering through experience which defensive arrangements provided best protection against coordinated fighter attacks. The Norden bombsight itself became subject to more realistic assessment among crews who used it repeatedly under combat conditions. The device functioned mechanically as designed when provided proper inputs and stable flight conditions. But combat frequently prevented meeting these requirements. Bombardiers learned to make rapid estimates rather than precise calculations when circumstances prevented careful measurement. They learned to bomb on formation leaders when individual bombing proved impossible. They learned that survival sometimes required abandoning bombing procedures entirely to take defensive action against attacking fighters. General Henry Arnold, commanding the Army Air Forces from Washington, faced difficult decisions about continuing daylight precision bombing operations despite mounting evidence of severe tactical vulnerabilities. Abandoning the doctrine meant acknowledging that years of training, equipment development, and strategic planning had been fundamentally misguided. Continuing operations without modification meant accepting unsustainable losses. The solution ultimately required technological intervention that doctrine had not originally anticipated. Long-range fighter escorts capable of accompanying bombers throughout entire missions. Development of drop tanks that extended fighter range had been underway before the crisis became acute, but the arrival of P-51 Mustangs in substantial numbers during early 1944 represented the critical development that transformed strategic bombing from a tactical failure into a sustainable campaign. The Mustang's combination of long range, high performance, and availability in increasing numbers allowed American planners to continue daylight operations while providing bomber formations with continuous fighter protection. This solution validated aspects of precision bombing doctrine while fundamentally modifying its execution. Bombers would continue attacking specific industrial targets using Norden bombsights under daylight conditions, but they would do so under fighter escort that engaged German interceptors before they could attack bomber formations in strength. The bombsight's accuracy limitations remained, but formations dropping concentrated bomb loads could saturate target areas sufficiently to damage industrial facilities even when individual bombing accuracy fell short of theoretical precision. The winter of 1943 to 1944 represented the nadir of confidence in precision bombing doctrine among those implementing it operationally, even as official communications continued emphasizing sophisticated American bombing capabilities. The gap between public statements and operational reality created cynicism among crews who understood through direct experience that actual combat bore limited resemblance to training or propaganda. Oberst Josef Kamhuber's assessment of American bombing capabilities required substantial revision by spring 1944 as the operational situation transformed in ways German defensive planning had not adequately anticipated. The arrival of long-range American escort fighters in increasing numbers fundamentally altered the tactical equation that had previously favored German defenses during unescorted portions of bomber missions. German fighter pilots who had grown accustomed to attacking bomber formations without significant fighter opposition suddenly confronted escorts that accompanied bombers throughout entire missions. The P-51 Mustang proved particularly problematic for Luftwaffe interceptors. Its performance exceeded that of most German fighters at the altitudes where bomber combat occurred. Its range eliminated the sanctuary that German fighters had previously enjoyed when American escorts reached their fuel limits and turned back toward England. Most significantly, its availability in growing numbers meant that German fighters increasingly had to fight through escort screens before reaching bomber formations. The tactical implications became apparent quickly through mounting German fighter losses. Luftwaffe pilots who had developed effective tactics against bomber formations found themselves engaged by American fighters before reaching attack positions. The disciplined defensive formations that made bombers difficult targets became less relevant when escorts prevented German fighters from reaching bombers in the first place. Loss rates among German fighter pilots increased dramatically during spring and summer 1944 as the air war evolved from primarily bomber defense to fighter versus fighter combat that favored American numerical and performance advantages. German industrial planning, which had assumed that fighter defenses could limit bombing damage to manageable levels, faced systematic disruption as American raids continued with increasing frequency and effectiveness. The precision that Norden bombsights theoretically provided remained inconsistent in practice, but formation bombing by dozens or hundreds of aircraft carrying tons of high explosive created destruction sufficient to damage industrial facilities, even when individual bomb accuracy fell short of precision. The ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, attacked repeatedly during 1943 and 1944, sustained cumulative damage that disrupted production, despite German efforts to repair and disperse manufacturing. The attacks never achieved the catastrophic industrial collapse that precision bombing doctrine predicted, partly because German industry proved more resilient and adaptable than American planners assumed, and partly because bombing accuracy limitations meant that destruction remained incomplete, but the sustained pressure forced diversion of resources to repair, reconstruction, and dispersal that otherwise would have supported increased production. American bomber crews, meanwhile, continued operations with more realistic understanding of what Norden bombsights could achieve under combat conditions. Training programs gradually incorporated lessons from operational experience, though the gap between training conditions and combat reality remained substantial. Bombardiers learned to accept that combat accuracy would never match training results, and that their primary responsibility involved getting bombs reasonably close to target areas rather than achieving the pickle barrel precision that mythology suggested. The psychological shift among American crews paralleled the tactical evolution. Initial confidence in technological superiority and doctrinal soundness gave way to more pragmatic understanding that survival required luck as much as skill, that equipment capabilities had limits regardless of sophistication, and that official doctrine often diverged significantly from operational practice. Veterans who survived multiple missions developed cynical appreciation for the gap between propaganda claims and combat reality, while maintaining professional discipline in executing missions despite growing awareness of doctrine's limitations. Post-war analysis by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, which examined bombing campaign effectiveness through detailed investigation of German industrial records and physical damage assessment, revealed conclusions that complicated simple narratives about precision bombing success. The survey found that strategic bombing contributed significantly to German defeat through cumulative industrial disruption, transportation network destruction, and diversion of resources to air defense. However, specific precision attacks rarely achieved the decisive results that doctrine predicted. Area attacks against transportation infrastructure often proved more effective than precision strikes against specific factories because transportation networks proved more difficult to repair and restore than discrete industrial facilities. The Norden bombsight itself emerged from the war with reputation substantially diminished from pre-war claims, but still recognized as sophisticated equipment that provided genuine capabilities within realistic parameters. Under favorable conditions, with well-trained crews, the device enabled bombing accuracy that exceeded unassisted visual bombing significantly. Under typical combat conditions, actual accuracy fell far short of theoretical capabilities, but remained sufficient for formation attacks against large industrial complexes. The myth of pickle barrel precision dissolved under operational scrutiny, replaced by more realistic assessment of what mechanical computing aids could achieve under combat stress. Lieutenant Carl Norden Jr., whose mission over Berlin in March 1944 opened this account, survived his combat tour and returned to America in autumn 1944. His experiences over German targets bore limited resemblance to the confident expectations that training had instilled. The Norden bombsight, that bore his father's name, had functioned as designed mechanically, but proved unable to deliver the precision that pre-war claims suggested under the brutal realities of combat operations over defended territory. His father, Carl Norden Sr., continued working on bombsight refinements throughout the war, proposing modifications intended to improve accuracy and ease of operation. But the fundamental limitations that combat revealed stemmed less from mechanical shortcomings than from the impossibility of maintaining precision under conditions that training had never adequately simulated. No amount of engineering refinement could overcome the disruption caused by evasive maneuvers, the obscuration created by smoke and weather, or the psychological pressure of operating while aircraft exploded around you and cannon shells tore through your bomber's fuselage. The security measures surrounding the Norden bombsight continued throughout the war despite German acquisition of intact examples that allowed detailed technical examination. This security theatre served purposes beyond protecting technological secrets that enemies already understood. It maintained confidence in American technological superiority among crews who needed to believe their sophisticated equipment provided advantages worth the risks they faced daily. It supported public narratives about precision bombing that justified the enormous resource investment in strategic air operations, and it created mystique around American bombing capabilities that may have influenced German planning even after technical secrets became known. The broader legacy of precision bombing doctrine and the Norden bombsight proved complex and contested. American air power advocates argued that strategic bombing contributed decisively to German defeat through industrial disruption and resource diversion, even when specific precision attacks fell short of theoretical effectiveness. Critics noted the enormous resources devoted to strategic bombing and questioned whether equivalent investment in other military capabilities might have produced greater return. The debate continued for decades after the war, with scholars analyzing bombing campaign effectiveness through increasingly sophisticated analytical frameworks, while veterans who participated understood through direct experience that reality had proved far more complicated than doctrine predicted. The irony that German intelligence correctly assessed many Norden bombsight limitations while underestimating American determination to persist despite losses and adapt through technological solutions. Like escort fighters, illustrates the difficulty of predicting operational outcomes based on technical capabilities alone. Wars are not won solely by superior equipment, but by the combination of technology, tactics, industrial capacity, training, adaptation, and determination to continue despite setbacks. American bombing campaigns ultimately contributed significantly to Allied victory not because the Norden bombsight achieved its theoretical precision, but because American forces possessed resources and determination to sustain operations until cumulative effects produced strategic results. The morning of March 6, 1944, when Lieutenant Norden hunched over his bombsight above Berlin, represented one moment in a vast campaign that would continue for another 14 months until German surrender. The device he used that morning performed within its actual capabilities while falling short of the promises that pre-war publicity suggested. The mission damaged some industrial facilities while missing others, killed some German civilians while leaving others unharmed, and contributed incrementally to the cumulative pressure that strategic bombing imposed on German capacity to continue the war. This complex, qualified success achieved through adaptation, persistence, and overwhelming resource application, rather than through technological precision alone, tells a more accurate story about American strategic bombing than myths about pickle barrel accuracy. From 20,000 feet, the Germans never expected the Norden bombsight to achieve its claimed precision under combat conditions, and in this skepticism they proved largely correct. But they also underestimated American willingness to accept costs, adapt tactics, and apply resources until doctrine's imperfect implementation produced cumulative strategic effects that contributed to ultimate Allied victory. The lesson verified through thousands of combat missions and decades of historical analysis suggests that technological sophistication alone rarely determines military outcomes. What matters ultimately is the combination of adequate technology, sound strategy, sufficient resources, effective adaptation, and determination to persist despite setbacks and contradictions between theory and practice. The Norden bombsight story, told honestly with its complications and contradictions preserved, illustrates these realities more clearly than simplified narratives about either American technological triumph or German defensive effectiveness. Airmen died in combat operations or from injuries sustained during missions. Many more were wounded, suffering injuries ranging from minor to permanently disabling. Thousands became prisoners of war after their aircraft went down over enemy territory, spending months or years in prison camps where conditions varied from barely adequate to deliberately brutal. German civilian casualties from Allied bombing reached into hundreds of thousands killed and many more wounded or left homeless. The psychological trauma extended to millions who experienced bombing raids, lost family members, or witnessed the destruction of their communities. Children who survived bombing often carried psychological scars into adulthood, struggling with anxiety, loss, and disrupted development from formative experiences marked by violence and instability. The forced laborers, who comprised an increasing portion of German industrial workforce, suffered particular vulnerability during bombing raids. Often excluded from air raid shelters reserved for German citizens, these workers from occupied territories had limited protection during attacks. Their deaths went largely unrecorded, and their suffering remained invisible in both wartime propaganda and much post-war analysis focused on military dimensions of the campaign. The infrastructure destruction from bombing extended far beyond immediate military impact to affect German society for years after the war ended. Housing shortages created by bombing lasted into the 1950s, as reconstruction slowly rebuilt destroyed residential areas. Cultural heritage lost in bombing could never be fully restored, as historic buildings, artworks, and archives disappeared permanently in fires and rubble. The psychological impact of living among ruins, constantly reminded of wartime destruction, shaped German post-war society in ways both obvious and subtle. The bomber offensive also transformed the American military aviation industry. and created institutional structures that persisted long after the war. Aircraft manufacturers that produced heavy bombers during the war converted production to commercial aviation during peacetime, applying wartime technological developments to civilian purposes. The Army Air Forces, which conducted the strategic bombing campaign, became the independent United States Air Force in 1947, with strategic bombing doctrine remaining central to its institutional identity and force structure planning. The veterans who served in bomber crews returned to civilian life, carrying memories and experiences that shaped their post-war trajectories in varied ways. Some parlayed military aviation experience into civilian aviation careers, becoming commercial pilots or working in aircraft industries. Others deliberately avoided any connection to aviation, finding other careers and rarely discussing their wartime service. Many joined veterans organizations that provided community with others who shared similar experiences. The psychological impact of combat service affected relationships, career choices, and life satisfaction in ways that varied among individuals but remained significant across the population of veterans. The myth of the Norden bombsight as a wonder weapon capable of impossible accuracy persisted in popular culture long after operational realities had revealed its limitations. This mythologizing served various purposes, from patriotic narratives about American technological superiority to simplified stories about World War II that emphasized clear distinctions between good and evil without engaging with moral complexities. The actual history, with its mixture of genuine achievement and significant limitations, offered a more nuanced and ultimately more interesting story than simplified myths. Understanding the Norden bombsight and strategic bombing campaign requires grappling with contradictions that resist easy resolution. The bombing represented both a genuine attempt to minimize civilian casualties through precision attacks on military targets, and a campaign that ultimately killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. The technology embodied both impressive engineering achievement and significant practical limitations. The doctrine reflected both sound strategic thinking and fundamental misjudgments about operational realities. The campaign contributed significantly to Allied victory while consuming enormous resources that might have been employed differently. These contradictions do not cancel each other out, but coexist as part of a complex historical reality that defies simple judgment. The men who designed the Norden bombsight, trained to use it, flew combat missions employing it, defended against attacks guided by it, and suffered from its employment, all participated in a vast historical event whose full meaning and significance remained contested decades after its conclusion. Their diverse perspectives and experiences collectively tell a more complete story than any single viewpoint could encompass. The legacy of precision bombing doctrine extended far beyond World War II to shape American military thinking through subsequent conflicts. The belief that technological sophistication could enable discriminate application of force against military targets while minimizing civilian casualties persisted through Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War, and continuing to contemporary conflicts. Each generation of military technology promised improved precision, yet each conflict revealed gaps between theoretical capabilities and operational results reminiscent of the Norden bombsight experience. The fundamental challenges that affected Norden bombsight effectiveness in World War II remained relevant in later conflicts, despite enormous technological advances. Weather still obscured targets. Combat stress still degraded human performance. Intelligence failures still resulted in attacks on wrong targets. Equipment malfunctions still occurred at critical moments. The fog of war still created uncertainty that perfect technology could not eliminate. Understanding these persistent challenges through historical analysis of the Norden bombsight experience provides context for evaluating contemporary military technologies and their promised capabilities. The human dimension of technological warfare, so clearly illustrated in the Norden bombsight story, deserves greater emphasis in discussions about military technology. Weapon systems do not operate in abstract isolation, but require human operators making decisions under stress with incomplete information and limited time. The interaction between human capabilities and limitations with technological capabilities and limitations determines actual system performance in ways that testing under ideal conditions cannot fully predict. Recognizing this reality encourages more realistic assessment of what technology can achieve and what remains dependent on human judgment, skill, and endurance. The strategic bombing campaign and the Norden bombsight that symbolized it ultimately illustrate fundamental realities about warfare, technology, and human endeavor. Grand ambitions run into practical limitations. Sophisticated technology proves both more capable and more limited than either advocates or critics initially claim. Human resilience allows people to endure extraordinary hardship, while human fallibility ensures plans never survive contact with reality unchanged. Moral clarity proves elusive when examining actions taken under extreme circumstances in pursuit of contestable objectives. These lessons, learned at enormous cost during World War II, remain relevant for understanding contemporary challenges and evaluating claims about technological solutions to complex problems.